Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
And we are live.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us on this week's Climate and Coordination call. We have a number of fascinating stories to discuss today. I think Daryl has a couple to discuss. I brought a couple as well. We have seen, at least I have seen, a real uptick in very serious climate-related stories in the past week. I don't know what exactly is going on. Well, I do know what's going on, but I just feel like this past week, people are kind of starting to pivot a little bit off of coronavirus and back onto other things that are really important that maybe, the world hasn't been discussing as much. And also, I think it's important to note that just because, we're in this coronavirus, this terrible situation, does not mean that the climate crisis is solved or whatever. I mean, obviously, we're having a moment, which may last several months, of some relief for nature, which I think is possibly one of the only good things to come out of this situation. But there's still an enormous amount of destruction going on. And so I know that Daryl has a really interesting story that I read over, which kind of compares and contrasts the different emissions reductions in different cities and countries around the world. So maybe he can discuss that a little later. But first, I wanted to start with this story, which is not about climate. We're going to get to that maybe after this, but I just thought this was a really interesting development, and it just didn't get the news headlines that I would think it would. I found out about it on a podcast, and I really didn't see it in the headlines. This is from CNBC. This came out on May 4th, and it's about the vice president of Amazon quitting over Amazon's treatment of workers who were critical of the company around the coronavirus response, not supplying enough equipment to them, not providing them sick leave, even firing some of them in some cases. And I just wanted to commend this person, Tim Bray, for coming out and talking about this. I think is very brave and courageous. And I just think it's a really interesting story about coordination and how we treat people. And he wrote a really interesting blog piece about this. It's called Buy Amazon. If you Google it, you can read it. And he talks about the difference between the treatment of the workers who are doing the Amazon Web Services and all of the computer-based stuff, which is a side that he was on, versus the treatment of the workers in the warehouse, which is very, very different situation. So anyway, I just wanted to start today by talking about this because I thought it would be a really fascinating just jumping off point, and then we'll get to the climate after this. But did any of you hear about this first off? And do you have any thoughts about it?
I hadn't heard about it until you sent that article.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'm one thing that's kind of fascinating to me about how different people have reacted to the virus and different companies have reacted to the viruses and how it's affected them. Like, it always makes me kind of think back to uh, the the kind of key point in the book Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace by Lawrence Lessig, where he breaks down the 4 ways individual behavior is affected in a society. And those 4 ways are architecture, market, laws, and norms. And so the one that's kind of most sticky is norms. And it's just kind of like, you know, when thinking about kind of how the norms have dictated how companies react and how governments react, I think it's kind of an interesting social experiment when looked upon from that level. So I would say that it exposes kind of how different companies prioritize different things when they're kind of confronted with a crisis like this.
Yeah, wow, thank you. What was the name of that book?
Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace.
Awesome. I'm going to check that out.
It's been a while. Let me make
Yeah,
sure.
that's great. I feel like every time I bring up a topic, you have a book that like expands on it even more. You're like the book encyclopedia. It's amazing.
It's weird though. I don't read books anymore.
Really?
Yeah, I listen to audiobooks now.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But it's kind of messed up. Like, the norms in my life have changed. So yeah. Maybe it's a ADD thing as a result of devices or something, but I read tons of articles, but I don't sit down and finish reading a book anymore, which is pathetic.
Well, I think audiobooks count, but yeah, I do think the experience of actually turning the pages is certainly missing from a lot of people's lives these days.
I'm not proud of it.
Well, Greg or Ian, do you have any comments about this Amazon story? If not, there's lots more to talk about, but I just wanted to know if you had any reflections on this.
Not Amazon, but something you said before about, this epidemic giving some reprieve to nature. It's not all good news on that, and that the pandemic has slowed down a lot of the decarbonization effort.
Can you say more about that, or?
Yeah, some of the organizations that are working to change policies and to put up solar and to get carbon out of the air have been affected and slowed down by the pandemic. So whether this pandemic turns out to be a net gain or a net loss for the environment, it could end up being a net loss because it slowed down our efforts to improve things.
Yeah, that's an important point, actually. Okay, well, I have three stories here that are all kind of part of one big story. So I guess I could maybe drop them in one at a time. And I also want to make sure there's time for Daryl to talk about the story that he sent to me, because I think it's extremely good. But first thing that I saw, which was, I think I tweeted out all of these stories because it was just such a crazy climate reporting week. This first one on the climate side of things is from May 5th. This is from BBC. Here I go, putting it in the chat. This is a crazy headline. It says climate change, more than 3 billion with a B could live in extreme heat by 2070. So this is just a really insane statistic. I mean, obviously it's a prediction. We don't know what's going to happen between 2020 and 2070. It's 50 years from now. But we have some very good, modeling capability based on, what's happening with emissions and ice melting and things like that. So this is a really another one of these sort of climate stories that went viral all over. And I'm glad that it did, because people need to realize that, the numbers of people who are going to be stuck inside. Actually, I had a reflection about this the other day about, how people are kind of getting stir crazy. They're getting sick of quarantining. Obviously, we have to follow the guidance of our local officials and see what happens. But I was thinking, if you hate to quarantine for a few weeks or months from coronavirus, people are going to hate to quarantine for, a good chunk of the year, every year, because they can't go outside because of extreme heat. So people better get used to staying home for long periods of time if this headline comes true. And I don't know if there's any way to avoid it at this point. So
Yeah, when I imagine life in 2070, it's so far ahead, 50 years. But at the same time, 50 years, if you think about 50 years back from this period of time was what, like
1970.
1970, when we all wore our brown corduroy flare pants, wide leg Wrangler pants. Um, and some of us grew mustaches, but I guess that's still the same now. But yeah, so it's kind of like when I kind of read over that article, I started to imagine, okay, well, if we're still alive and we've kind of been able to kind of employ technology to kind of help save us, we're probably going to be living in these kinds of pods, like these kind of like air conditioned, Dubai kind of living. Maybe we'll figure out how to, like what they're doing in Dubai, where they're like air conditioning the outdoors, like maybe, there'll be something like that. Obviously it would have to be renewable, but yeah, it's just, everyone seems to say the damage that we've already done now is irreversible. So, we're going to have to figure out how to adapt.
Well, there is the hope of, I agree with everything you just said. However, there is the hope of carbon sequestration, but it's not known how fast that can be employed and if that can change long-term climate patterns, in the future, or, at what rate. So that's obviously, that technology could be really useful, but it might take years. Like if we sequester, a bunch of carbon, maybe that we'll see the effect of that 10, 20 years from now, or, who knows? I don't know the math on it. But anyway, there are a lot of people who are looking into that. And I think it's smart to look into it, because at some point it's not going to be enough for us to just, get Earth down to net zero carbon, which even just doing that would be really difficult to do. But anyway, we have a long way to go on that. But here's another one. This is a very important story. This was shared by Greta Thunberg, who I follow on Twitter. She has a lot of great tweets. And actually, this is from June. This is an older story, but it ties into the final story I wanted to talk about, which ties back into the coronavirus. So this, actually, we might have discussed this on a different call, but I just wanted to share it because Greta tweeted it, and or maybe she tweeted the other story. Anyway, I saw this on Twitter a bunch recently over the past week. I think people are kind of coming back to this, and it might have been re-reported on. But this is from the Smithsonian. This is about the Smithsonian Magazine, I should say. And the headline says, plant species have been disappearing 500 times faster than normal thanks to humans. So this is just a really crazy story. I think like these types of headlines, and obviously you have to read the story to get the full picture, and there's a study that's been done, and obviously they talk about the sixth mass extinction and all of that. I think that these headlines, which really put things into like stark terms, are better for regular people who are not studying the climate crisis on a daily or weekly basis, because they really explain just how insane the times are that we're living in. And, I don't know if the coronavirus is going to help with rates of extinction. Obviously, it helps with carbon, but back to what Ian was saying, I just don't know if, like, once a species goes extinct or it's about to go extinct, like, is there anything that we can do? You know what I mean? Because it's such a last stop on the train of life, So that would be something interesting to look into, is extinction rates during the coronavirus. But anyway, I just wanted to share this because I actually didn't realize that it was 500 times the normal rate, which is, obviously quite high. So that's something. Not sure if you guys have any comments on that, but there's one last thing that I wanted to post here, and this one is new. I think this is the one that Greta put out, and this is May 7th. Yeah, so this is from just yesterday, and this is from The Guardian, and this kind of ties this entire story together because I'm trying to really understand the big picture of what's going on here. And anyway, The Guardian, this says, promiscuous treatment of nature will lead to more pandemics. So this is, obviously we could say our treatment of nature has been much worse than just promiscuous, but this is a really fascinating story about how you can sort of environmentally trace the source of certain pandemics to wildlife destruction, and how we are often, really putting ourselves at risk by taking these animals out of their environments, obviously cutting down more forests, where these habitats are shrinking, and the animals move into the cities and then they make us sick. So obviously each pandemic or each epidemic, even if it doesn't become a pandemic, has its own origin story, so they're not all the same. But this is a really fascinating article and a really important one that I hope goes viral. And it's all about how our behavior is causing us to suffer like this. And obviously factory farming and a lot of other practices are contributing to this as well. But this is a great piece for anybody who is trying to understand how we participated in this terrible disaster, and how also to put a small pause on the climate crisis is, I don't know if it's really worth the terrible price that we're paying. We could just decide to not be as environmentally destructive in the first place, and that would be, the easier way to go about it, if that makes any sense to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of deciding as a species is to me the whole key, right? It's about becoming globally self-aware as a species, and that means everybody understanding the science and the implications together as a species, and then figuring out ways where we can compare our data and coordinate and work together to solve problems. It's basically, the way I think of it is that it's either going to happen or we will fail as a species, like so many others have. We'll just be another one that comes and goes. But there are some things that indicate that perhaps there is something unique about us as humans. I mean, like Elon Musk has pointed out before, we've been cyborgs for a long time. And I kind of like his way of looking at what a phone is. Like, a phone is basically an extension of our brain. We now have in our pockets the ability to access, encyclopedias and dictionaries of information. And so, it is literally like an extension of our brain. Our brain is just one part of it, and then we access this other part of our brain, which is in our pocket. So we've kind of geoengineered things for quite a long time. That is intrinsically part of what we are as a species. Like gets back to the whole kind of concept of the discovery of music and how using the tools of musical instruments, we were able to hack into our own brains and develop language and hack into our, the thing that we had evolved that allowed us to eat and breathe, our mouth. We hacked into it and created a communication system out of it. So, to me, I think that's what's going to happen. I like to look at the future in a glass half full way. It helps keep me sane, and it makes me happier. So, I'd like to think that human beings are going to kind of figure out how to work together, become globally self-aware as a species, not just individually self-aware. And when that happens, I think that we're going to do things that previously were considered miraculous. And so, that's why I'm at RChain, because I really think that RChain is solving one major piece of that puzzle. And, I think we're going to pull it off. Not just RChain, but humanity.
Amen. That is such a nice, optimistic and fearless outlook, and I love that. If you would like, I know that you have a story that you wanted to bring that I looked over and I thought it would be really great to discuss today. Would you like to talk about it, Daryl?
Let's see if I'm thinking of the same one. Is it the BBC one about climate change and coronavirus?
Yeah, it was the one that compared the different emissions of different places right now, the reductions, and I don't remember where it was from, but we can find it here. But it was about coronavirus, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, climate change and coronavirus, 5 charts about the biggest carbon crash, that one?
Yes, and where is that one from?
Yeah, that's BBC. Here, I'll just post it in the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, that would be great. I loved reading that.
Yeah, well, it was just full of data. We love data here at RChain.
Yeah, they were great charts. I love charts.
Yes, charts and data. So yeah, I can read over some of the stats that it was kind of pointing out, because it really kind of the charts and the data really kind of exposed to what degree coronavirus has really made us stop, or really slow down. It's pretty profound. Yeah, so here I'll read off some stuff from it. The coronavirus pandemic of 2020 dwarfs all of the previous shocks by some distance. In a few months, demand for energy globally has fallen off a cliff. The IEA says that the world will lose 6%. The world will use 6% less this year, equivalent to losing the entire energy demand of India. And this will feed through to large falls in CO2 levels. I think like all the data we're gathering about this is going to be really helpful for the modeling, because we're going to be able to kind of see exactly how these kinds of drops affect recovery of CO2. So I think if anything, this pandemic is going to I think help improve our models. I'm just kind of reading through some other stats here that I might want to share.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating that this article compares a lot of different places and talks about why and how, like, for example, traffic is very, very different in Paris right now versus Shanghai versus London. So and actually I wish they included Los Angeles in this, but anyway, they include New York, but of course, New York isn't as much of a driving city as driving as in cars as some other cities in the United States. But anyway, I found that to be a really interesting group of charts. They talk about the airlines, and also they talk about the impact on emissions due to lockdown. So this is actually really fascinating statistic. So here it shows that in New York City, in March, the lockdown impacted New York with a 10% reduction of emissions. So basically, New York is using 90% of what it would have been using. Paris is down 72%. So they're using 28% of what they usually would use. And so I'm just curious, this is a very fascinating one to me, because I'm like, why even in a pandemic, when two cities are generally doing the same thing, right? New York is locked down, Paris is locked down. Why is it that Paris is able to get almost 75% reduction and New York is only able to do 10%? Like maybe, for example, I mean, I have some ideas about this. Maybe it's because in Paris, people are cooking more at home, and we're doing, probably a lot more delivery stuff, where, delivering groceries and delivering food, which obviously has more people driving, a lot more plastic, other things like that. But I mean, it's just such a stark difference. But also, it says here that much of New York's CO2 comes from emissions related to heating the buildings. But still with that, I just find this article to be really a very, very good, detailed look at, what's happening during coronavirus.
Yeah, I think it was also pointing out that they're different, largely also because of the way they get their energy. So, if you're already getting a lot of your energy from renewables, then it'll be different.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is whether or not this is a model that could be utilized more generally. Like, instead of slowing down all the time, what if we just agreed 2 months out of every year, or 2.5 months out of every year, we just slow down, like we have done with this quarantine. We just go into a different mode of living, which I know many people have reported has been better for their lives, right? There's been less stress. They've been able to catch up on their yard work, or spend time with their children, or complete a project that's just been sitting there on the to-do list. If it has these enormous benefits, I mean, obviously there have been some trade-offs, right? But we might be able to simply restructure life according to a rhythm and a cadence. I think a lot of what's been out of balance is that there's the kind of mania that has no downtime. People work through holidays, they work through, there's just this manic activity all the time with no downtime. And now we have this enforced downtime, and it has a lot of benefits all the way around. So maybe that would be something, as a globally self-aware culture, we could adopt, as a kind of global cadence that would give the planet a chance to breathe, do an inhale as opposed to always exhaling.
Well, that's a great idea. And obviously throughout history, there's been a social norm, which is that Sunday is supposed to be a day of rest, which is 1/7 of the whole year. And which is pretty close to what you said, which is 2 months off, which is 1/6 of the year. So, there's also, going along with what you said, there's been a lot of research that a lot of young climate activists are doing about the connection between the capitalistic culture, not only infiltrating the economy, but also like the human mind and the human spirit, about how we have to always be more productive and grow. And the connection between how many hours people work a week and how much emissions is produced. And it's a connection that not a lot of people make, because they think, well, I'm not emitting anything, I'm a human being, it's the factory over there. But it's all really connected. And I think it would be very interesting to have a discussion as a society about exactly what you just said, because people do need a break. And another great thing about coronavirus, or maybe I see somebody's going to take that clip and use it against me. Nora says there's great things about coronavirus. One of the other few silver linings of coronavirus is I think it causes people to have time to reflect and really ask themselves what's important in life to them, which is something that a lot of us don't do enough.
It's funny. That's the first thing that comes up when I see someone that I haven't seen since coronavirus, and we're like when I'm dropping off my daughter at school, and then I see another parent there, and we keep our social distancing and we start a conversation, and almost immediately the conversation it takes like one or two sentences, and we arrive at, yeah, but it sure helped us kind of really realize what's important in life. It's kind of amazing how it seems to be a mutual understanding amongst a lot of people that I've kind of encountered since coronavirus. And I love that word cadence. It's interesting that Steve Ross Talbot used that word in a different context in one of our meetings over this last week, and now it pops up again with Greg. It's a great word because first of all, it's from music, but it also it suggests kind of like a rhythm, a kind of natural rhythm that kind of when we look out to nature, we see them all over the place. And so, we see these cycles. And so the idea of norms forming, and I think it's going to have to come from norms, at least initially, rather than, laws or the market, or the architecture. So I think that the norm, when we examine the norms of what seems to be happening, it's not hard for me to imagine the implementation of something like that. It would just kind of naturally start happening.
Yeah, I've also had the same experience that you were talking about when you were saying that you were talking to people at the school. I've had a similar thing. I was just on the phone with a dear friend of mine yesterday talking about, life and everything. And yeah, same thing happened. We just said, isn't it nice that we're reflecting on what's really important in life? And, I think a lot of people are doing that, and a lot of people need to do that, because actually, even though we're in a pandemic and a climate crisis and an economic crisis and potentially political crisis and just a lot of crises in general, I still feel like a lot of people are not really using the time to pause, at least mentally or emotionally. I feel like there's a lot of frantic energy out there still. Obviously, being in an economic crisis doesn't usually help people calm down. But yeah, I feel like as a society, we could do a better job of really just trying to become less frantic overall, which would be really useful, I think. The more we relax, the more we're able to do. And that thing, actually, Greg, this brings me back to something that Robert Fripp may have talked about, which I'm not sure what the exact quote is, but if you can't do nothing, then you can't do anything. If you can't learn to do nothing first, something like that. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but
I don't. I'd have to look for the quote, but certainly, there's been a lot of emphasis on doing nothing as much as possible. for some period of time.
Yeah, and kind of that idea of like, if your actions don't come from a still place, then your actions are going to be fraught with chaos and confusion and ineffectiveness, which is the opposite of what you want when you're dealing with multiple crises, you know?
Yeah, I mean, again, for me, it comes down to my experience of the present moment. So what I notice is that the closer I get to, centering in the present moment, the more there's an appearance that I'm slowing down from the inside. So on the inside, it feels like I'm slowing down. On the outside, it has often been reported to me that it appears as if I'm speeding up. And the reason is because I'm no longer chasing the unintended consequences of my actions. So a lot of times what happens is we'll take an action and almost immediately the consequences are not ideal. And so we have to go to correct those, and then the actions that we take to correct those also generate unintended consequences, which are not ideal. So then we have to go chase those, and so on and so forth. So essentially, because of the way I have intended or committed to action, I'm set off course because I'm chasing after a wave of consequences. But if I'm moving sort of from a different place, from what you were calling stillness, then the unintended consequences of my behavior are actually beneficial. Instead of placing myself in harm's way, I place myself in help's way. And so then now it appears as if I'm speeding up because every action is effective. There's not a lot of undo that has to go chase every action. I don't know if this makes any sense, but that's my inner experience and sort of connected with reported outer experience.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I love that we always, well, maybe not always, but we often come back to the present moment in this discussion, which I think is undervalued since it's all there is in life. I just took a note, which I often do when you're talking about these things, about putting yourself in help's way. That light went off in my soul when I heard that just now. So I appreciate you saying that. Yeah.
That's related to what Ian was asking to talk about at the top, I think, before we started the recording. So I wrote a letter to the board. The RChain board is currently contemplating a communications charter, a communications committee charter, and part of what the communications committee wants to do is to decentralize the authority. And I'm all for that, right? I mean, the original proposal from November of 2018 was to get rid of the office of the president and replace it with, 4 vice presidents or potentially 5 vice presidents that all report directly to the board. As a step towards, a genuine commitment to decentralization. But what I tried to put forward at the beginning of 2018, in February of 2018, was at the governance forum, was that again this idea that unless we're moving from a very different place, the consequences of RChain as a community will also have this situation where we'll take an action and we'll have to go and undo a bunch of the consequences and then undo a bunch of the consequences. I mean, we see this all the time in modern society, right? If you think about Western medicine, how often is it that you have to take drugs to deal with the side effects of the drugs that you're taking, and drugs to deal with the side effects of those drugs, and so on and so forth. So this is not some woo-woo thing. It's like it happens all the time. in modern society. And what I tried to propose in February of 2018 is that there are actually, objective technologies that can help us move from this different place, which then makes it possible to decentralize our efforts. And the letter to the board, Daryl mentioned listening to audiobooks. I've been listening to an audiobook called The Neurogeneration. It's written by a woman who is a CEO of a company that provides portable EEG headsets. So you can put them on your head, and Bluetooth connection to your computer, and get a lot of data about your brain activity. And one of the things that they did was to connect with Thich Nhat Hanh's community Plum Village. And when she first put it on, the monk who was sort of the emissary from Plum Village, she thought the headset was not working correctly because he was always in theta and delta waves. He was never, unless he was speaking, his brain would just return to theta and delta waves. And it's like, wait, what's wrong? Normally most human brain activity is of a completely different nature. And when they discovered what was, so then he would speak and the brain activity would look more normal, and he'd shut up and it would immediately go back to this sort of rested meditative state. And so she asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, hang on, I'm getting a call from a family member. I'll be right back."
What a cliffhanger.
Amazing. But Thich Nhat Hanh is an amazing Buddhist writer and person. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him, but I love his work.
Besides the technologies behind decentralization, I think we have to kind of precede that by getting into some of the principles of decentralization. And this isn't work that we need to do
Hello?
Ian, are you there? Is this a pun about the present moment?
Oh, it is. It's happening. We're inside the present moment, you and I. And, how do we get out of it? Or maybe let's just stay here.
You can't, yeah.
Sorry, I got kicked off.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, please.
I was saying there are different kinds of decentralization. There's administrative, political, fiscal, market decentralization. So I think we need to focus in on what we're trying to do. And the context that Greg was talking about was administrative decentralization. So anyway, I was going to post a link that just gets into some more academic description of this.
Oh, please do.
Just something that popped up while you're posting that link, just something that popped up on Twitter. I got a notification about this. It says that Google has just announced 14 minutes ago that the majority of their staff is working from home until 2021. So that's an interesting development.
Interesting indeed.
Yeah, I'm sure you can Google it.
So, okay, so that's an indication that they are actually thinking forward, potentially beyond COVID-19, and taking advantage of this change as an opportunity to make more of a permanent change to how they operate.
I don't know if the reasoning is clear, but I believe that could be one potential factor. Yes. I agree with that. Oh, let's see this. Oh, this is cool. The online source book on decentralization and local development. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's actually cited quite a bit by some environmental organizations like the Center for International Forestry, the Center for Earth Institute, the Center of the Earth Institute at Columbia University.
Wow.
Because we're not going to get it done. I mean, this is the biggest problem of helping the environment. It has to be done in a decentralized way. And so this is some good thinking about how to organize the effort.
Yeah, and actually this really ties into a really fantastic lecture, but I guess it's really just more of a theory that there's the great climate activist called Jamie Margolin. She's really great. She's testified on the floor of Congress. She gave a TED Talk. She's just a really amazing person. She's an author. I think she's maybe 18 or 17, something like that. I actually have no idea how old she is. But anyway, she talks a lot about how the same way of organizing that got us into this, colonialized, capitalized, endless growth kind of situation is not the same organizing mechanism that we're going to use to get out of it, right? Because we're just going to keep thinking the same way. So I think that really points to what you've just said, Ian, is that we need to go about the problem in a different way if we want to find ourselves in a different solution. Like there's that Chinese proverb. Actually, I have no idea if it's Chinese. People say it's Chinese, but I've read it in English, so how do I know? If you keep going the way you're going, you're going to end up where you're headed, right? That kind of thing. So that's something I often think about. But thank you for sending this, Ian. This is great.
Yeah, I'm just looking for ways that, since RChain platform, I mean, it's technology. It's a platform that we can build tools on that can be used for coordinating this effort. But we need to plug into the larger communities and the governmental, non-governmental organizations that need to make use of the tools that we're creating, help us build the tools that we're creating. So I think those are things like World Bank. So if you have any contacts there, let's get them on the show.
I'll go through my Rolodex and
Okay.
I will get back to you on that. I'm sure between the four of us, there's got to be someone that we know, or someone we know who knows someone who works at the World Bank.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I'll work on
it. I'm sure you will, with great efficacy. So I'm not sure if Greg is going to come back here. I know he had to drop off for a moment, but is there anything else that you guys wanted to discuss today? If not, possibly we could wrap this up. But up to you guys. What do you think?
Well, I was just kind of thinking while you guys were talking there about just the whole idea of global.
I had a family member who needed some reassurance.
Oh,
that's okay. Daryl, go ahead. Keep going.
That's okay, because I was hoping that Greg would come back and conclude, because that was a cliffhanger.
So we were talking about the EEG results of the monk, and so the monk told this woman that he was engaging in a practice that his teacher had taught him, which was essentially, without going into a lot of details, about deepening his experience of the present moment. So returning to the sensations in his body and sort of a qualitatively different awareness. And I think probably it's now part of a mainstream culture that people recognize that a lot of different practitioners of meditation, other traditions, they're able to measure differences in brain activity. What this woman found was this. So she went to Plum Village, and tested the hypothesis that the monk had told her, which was that, you know, he wasn't special and that everyone in the Plum Village would have the same capacity. And she was able to confirm that. So, you know, this was just a group of like-minded individuals who all supported each other in this practice. In fact, it became they immediately started a game where whoever was wearing the headset, the other members of the village would try to tickle them or tease them or distract them in various ways to see if it would change the brain activity. And the monks were able to maintain their restive meditative state even under this kind of sort of distractive behavior. And so the reason I give so much detail to this is because I think a lot of times when people hear, oh, there are these other spiritual technologies, or I don't know what to call them, but there are these different approaches, then they start to go, oh, well, that's not objective, that's subjective. It's not true. It's real and it's objective, and we can see it, we can measure it. And these are the kinds of technologies we need to add to the mix in order to effectively decentralize the RChain effort and many other efforts. We don't really have time to go into why, but I can refer back to what I was saying before. From that place of stillness, from this place of doing nothing, we can put ourselves in help's way, in the sense that we're not having to chase after the unintended consequences of our behavior. That the unintended consequences of our behavior become beneficial to us. And so that's really all I'm trying to get at, and that is the key to decentralization.
That was awesome. It kind of, if I'm understanding it right, it kind of reminds me of this thing a friend told me once that kind of helped me during a time. And he said, remember, the universe conspires to help you.
Indeed.
It just kind of, it unlocked something in me at that moment, right? Because I was kind of being all doom and gloom. And he basically was just like, it's all about how you look at it, right? If you look at it in a positive way, where you're going to solve this, you're going to do this, you're going to get past this. There's all sorts of, what's the right word? Forces out there that you can tap off of to find that solution.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we have 2 minutes until we have to be in the next call, so I think we need to wrap this up. But I would like to say thank you guys for joining today. Hopefully we'll have some more very interesting guests next week, or in coming weeks. Daryl and I are both working on that. And please subscribe to RChain on YouTube. You can become a member of RChain at rchain.coop, and you can email climate@rchain.coop if you'd like to be a guest. And I just want to thank you all for another fantastic discussion.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you, everyone.
Of course.
Have a great week.
Okay.
Thanks.
Oh.